My wife and in-laws kicked me out after I paid the $3,000 bill. What's next? Imagine this: I'm sitting in a fancy restaurant, ready to enjoy a meal, when suddenly, my wife and her family throw me out after I foot a $3,000 bill. This is the shocking start of my story, full of twists, betrayal, and a battle for justice. What would you do if the person you trusted the most turned your life upside down? Stick around to hear how I fight back. And you won't believe the shocking twist at the end. It was a crisp autumn morning in New York City. The kind of day where the air feels sharp and fresh, almost like a promise of something new. I stepped into a small, cozy cafe on the corner of Main Street, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I wasn't looking for anything special, just a quiet spot to unwind, a place where I could sip my coffee and let my thoughts drift. Little did I know, that was the day my life would change forever. As I entered, my gaze fell upon a woman sitting by the window, her auburn hair catching the light that filtered through the glass. She was hunched over a notebook, scribbling something with a focus that seemed to put the rest of the world on pause. I hesitated for a moment. Should I approach her? Should I just find a corner and sip my drink in peace? But something about her, something magnetic, tugged at me. I couldn't explain it. I knew it was silly, she was a stranger, but there was an undeniable pull. Is this seat taken? My voice came out steady, even though my pulse was racing. She looked up, startled at first, her eyes wide but soft. Then, without missing a beat, she smiled. It wasn't just any smile, it was radiant. The kind that could stop a man dead in his tracks. Not at all, she said, gesturing to the empty chair in front of her. The warmth in her voice made the room feel like it belonged to just the two of us. I sat down, feeling a nervous excitement bubbling in my chest. The conversation started effortlessly, almost like we had known each other for years. Her name was Hannah, a marketing consultant with a passion for photography. She spoke with a quiet confidence, her words flowing smoothly, each one wrapped in intelligence and charm. I found myself talking about my work as a software developer, my obsession with turning chaos into order. She laughed, a sound that made me feel lighter than I had in a long time. Her laugh was infectious, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or the overwhelming mess that was my personal life. I was lost in the moment, in her, in the ease of being with someone who made me feel understood. Before we even knew it, 2 hours had passed, and we were exchanging phone numbers, both knowing we'd meet again. In the weeks that followed, our relationship deepened quickly. Late-night phone calls turned into weekend trips, dinners at new restaurants, and plans for a future that seemed like it was straight out of a fairy tale. We were inseparable, and I couldn't remember a time when I had felt this alive. My friends, when they met her, couldn't stop commenting on how perfect we seemed together. "You've hit the jackpot," Mark, one of my closest friends, said one night over drinks. I smiled, believing him, thinking I was the luckiest guy alive. But looking back now, I know there had been signs. Small things I had ignored, brushed off as nothing more than quirks. Hannah's charm, as captivating as it was, always seemed a bit rehearsed. She thrived on attention, not just from me but from everyone. Whether it was praise from strangers or admiration from friends, she soaked it in like she couldn't get enough. At first, I chalked it up to her magnetic personality, but now, with the benefit of hindsight, I wonder if it was more about controlling the narrative, controlling the room, and ultimately, controlling me. Our whirlwind romance didn't take long to escalate. Soon, we were married in a beautiful ceremony, the kind where everything feels perfect except. I didn't realize that the fairy tale I had stepped into was about to shatter into pieces. As I stood at the altar, watching Hannah walk toward me in her flowing white dress, I thought I had it all. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for that moment, everything felt like it was meant to be. But the truth, I would soon discover, was that the woman who had captivated me in that cafe was about to become the source of my greatest heartbreak. I didn't know it then, but as I walked down the aisle with her, I was unknowingly stepping into a life where love would be eclipsed by betrayal, and trust would soon become a distant memory. Marriage, I quickly learned, wasn't just about the union between me and Hannah. It was a package deal, and part of that deal included her family. I had to learn to navigate, or rather, endure. From the moment I met Linda, Hannah's mother, I knew I was in for something I hadn't prepared for. Linda was a force of nature, a woman in her early 60s who carried herself with such authority that it felt like the air around her shifted when she walked into a room. She was impeccably dressed, every piece of jewelry sparkling under the light, her sharp eyes always scanning, always judging. When Hannah introduced us, Linda didn't even bother with pleasantries. "So, you're the one my daughter keeps talking about," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an accusation. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, extending my hand. Linda looked at my hand as if it might contaminate her. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she shook it, her grip light, almost dismissive. That first encounter set the tone for our relationship. Linda wasn't just a protective mother, she was a lioness, fiercely guarding her cub, and in my case, her lioness didn't like what she saw. She had opinions about everything: my career, our future home, even the way I dressed. "A man's suit should reflect his ambition," she remarked one evening, eyeing my slightly wrinkled blazer at dinner. Hannah, to her credit, tried to mediate. "Mom, please," she said, her voice lacking conviction. But Linda's presence was overpowering, and I quickly realized that Hannah, though she claimed to be independent, often deferred to her mother's judgment on matters that should have been ours to decide as a couple. The real trouble began when Linda insisted on a prenuptial agreement. "It's just a precaution," she said, dismissing the idea as though it were no big deal. "You never know what might happen in the future." I felt my stomach churn with anger. The way Linda spoke about me, like I was an untrustworthy stranger, left a bitter taste in my mouth. "It's not personal," Hannah had said. When I tried to justify it, she didn't understand. But deep down, I knew the sting of it wouldn't go away. Reluctantly, I agreed to the prenup. But I had to add my own stipulation: if infidelity occurred, the cheater would owe the other $50,000. Linda raised an eyebrow but didn't object. Hannah, however, seemed hurt. "It won't come to that," she said softly, her hand resting on mine. But I wasn't so sure anymore. As the months went by, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Linda's constant interference, combined with Hannah's reluctance to stand up to her mother, chipped away at my patience. It was clear that our marriage was being dictated by someone else, someone who had never respected me, and whose opinion mattered far more than mine. And the question that gnawed at me every day was simple: was Hannah truly happy with me? Or was she just trying to appease Linda, trying to fit into a role she'd never really chosen for herself? I wanted to believe in our love. I wanted to think everything would work out. But as the cracks in our relationship deepened, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The fairy tale I thought I was living was built on a foundation of manipulation and control. I had stepped into a world that wasn't my own, and it was starting to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. As I sat at the dinner table that night, hearing Linda's sharp voice critique yet another one of my decisions, I realized with a sinking feeling that the woman I had fallen in love with was no longer the woman sitting across from me. The fairy tale was over, and the nightmare was just beginning. I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. It wasn't just the little things anymore: the subtle comments from Linda, the way Hannah's eyes flickered nervously when I'd suggest doing something without consulting her mother first. No, it was something deeper now. I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, but with Hannah and her mother, the signals were mixed, distorted. They played their roles so well. Linda's smooth, well-placed remarks, always with that fake warmth and graciousness, had begun to feel like a string of lies, thinly veiled under layers of politeness. It wasn't long before I found myself constantly on edge, second-guessing every decision, every move. At first, I tried to chalk it up to paranoia, but it was more than that. It was the unsettling realization that my relationship wasn't entirely mine. Linda was everywhere, like an invisible force in our home, in our decisions. The worst part? Hannah didn't even seem to notice. Or worse, maybe she just didn't care. I tried, time and again, to discuss it with her, to get her to see the growing influence her mother had over our lives. "Hannah, we need to set some boundaries," I had said one night, my voice low, my tone careful, trying not to sound like I was accusing her. But the words always seemed to fall flat. "I don't know, Jason," she'd replied, her voice distant, as if her mind was already somewhere else. "She just wants what's best for us. She's been through a lot. Through a lot? My mind screamed. That's the excuse? But I kept quiet. After all, what good was an argument? I didn't want to look like the bad guy, the husband who couldn't even tolerate his wife's mother. So, I let it slide, hoping the tension would ease. But it didn't. It only grew. The cracks in our marriage were becoming more pronounced, the silence between us heavier. One evening, after another one of Linda's unannounced visits, I found myself alone with Hannah. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. Her fingers tapping absently on the screen. "Hannah," I said softly, breaking the silence. She didn't look up, but I could see her body tense. "Can we talk?" She sighed, setting the phone down with a sigh that made my stomach twist. "What's this about now, Jason?" "It's about your mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. Every decision, every move we make, she's involved." Hannah shook her head, her lips pressed together tightly. "Mom is just trying to help. She wants to make sure we're making the right choices." "You're being too sensitive about this, Jason." "Too sensitive?" My blood boiled. My heart pounded as I looked at her, but I didn't want to snap, didn't want to make things worse. "This isn't just about your mom. It's about us. It's about our life together, our future. I don't want to spend the rest of my life being controlled by someone else." "I'm not being controlled," she snapped, her eyes flashing with irritation. "She's my mother, Jason. I've spent my whole life listening to her. You can't just come in and tell me to cut her out of my life because you're uncomfortable." The word stung. I wanted to fight back, wanted to scream, but instead, I swallowed the words, turning away from her. There was no point in arguing. No point in trying to make her see it, not when she had already made up her mind. I was just overreacting, right? Just a jealous, insecure husband. That's what she probably saw me as. But then the cracks began to show in ways that couldn't be ignored. The money. The spending. I had always been careful with our finances, making sure we didn't live beyond our means, especially when we were just starting out. But recently, I started noticing large withdrawals from our joint account. Expensive items, clothes, jewelry that were being purchased with money that didn't quite add up. I tried to let it go, thinking maybe it was just Hannah treating herself to something nice. But when the withdrawals became more frequent, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The numbers didn't lie. I checked our bank statements, my eyes scanning the entries, my mind racing with suspicion. I found it several $1,000s spent on designer clothes and high-end electronics, all in Hannah's name. But what really set me off was the trip to a luxury resort. I'd never heard of it, didn't even know we'd been planning it. When I confronted Hannah about it, her response was smooth, rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I just thought it would be nice," she said, her tone airy, as if it were nothing. "I didn't think it would hurt anything." "You've been working so hard lately, Jason." I wanted to treat myself. Treat herself? My pulse spiked. This wasn't just about treating herself. This was something else. Something bigger. My stomach churned as I wondered where all the money had gone. Money was really going. And then, one evening, as I walked into our bedroom, I found the receipts hidden under the drawer, a stash of them, tucked away like a secret. Each receipt was for something more expensive than the last. A spa weekend. A new phone. A set of luxury bags. My head spun. There was no way she could afford all of this with her income alone. But I wasn't stupid. I knew the truth now. It wasn't just her, she was hiding something. And when I began connecting the dots, I realized it wasn't just the money that was being siphoned away. It was my entire life, my trust, my marriage, slowly slipping through my fingers like sand. But what hurt the most wasn't just the deceit. It was the fact that I had been so blind, so wrapped up in the idea of the perfect life, of a future with Hannah, that I hadn't seen the truth until it was too late. One night, as the unease became too much to bear, I took a walk. I needed time to think, to clear my head. It was a crisp evening, and the city streets were quiet. But my mind wasn't. It was racing, spiraling with questions. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so wrong about the woman I loved? As I passed a park, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out, half expecting it to be a message from Hannah. But it wasn't. It was an email alert from my bank. My heart dropped as I clicked on the message. It was from the bank, notifying me of a recent withdrawal, a large one. made just a few hours ago. My hands shook as I read the details. It was another payment to the resort. Another luxury expense. This wasn't just about her spending. It was about a pattern of calculated, methodical siphoning of money from our joint account. This was bigger than just a few impulse purchases. Something was off. And as I looked around the park, the weight of the betrayal crushed me. There was no turning back now. I had to confront her. I couldn't live like this anymore. The next day, when Hannah returned from a lunch with her mother, I was waiting. My face was calm, but my eyes were burning with a quiet intensity. I didn't say anything at first, just watched her, feeling a coldness settle in my chest. I needed answers. I needed the truth. And when it came, it would come crashing down like a storm. "Hannah," I said, my voice low. "We need to talk. About the money. About everything." She froze, a flicker of panic flashing across her face before she composed herself. "What are you talking about?" I didn't waste time. "You've been taking money from our account. A lot of money. And you've been hiding it. Where's it going, Hannah? What are you really doing with all of it?" Her expression faltered for just a moment, but then she straightened up. "Jason, you don't understand," she began, but the words didn't sound right. They were too rehearsed. Too perfect. I didn't let her finish. "You've been planning something, haven't you? For a while now. You and your mother. And I've been too blind to see it." Hannah's silence was answer enough. And in that silence, I knew I had been right all along. The storm was here. The truth was out. And now, there was no going back. Now, things were about to get intense. I'd got proof. But was it enough to win this war? As secrets were uncovered, the stakes grew higher, and the truth came crashing down. But here's the burning question. Would my fight for justice lead to a victory, or would the game change again in ways I never expected? What do you think is coming next? Drop a comment with your prediction. Comment 1 if you think I expose everything. Comment 2 if you think my life takes another wild turn. My hands clenched into fists as I stood in our living room, staring at Hannah. The words I had been holding in for days, weeks, months even, were finally pushing their way to the surface. Every moment of doubt, every look I had seen in her eyes, every whispered conversation between her and her mother, had all led me to this. And yet, here I was, facing the woman I once thought I would grow old with, now standing before me. Her expression blank, almost too calm. "Hannah, the first need you to tell me what's really going on. What's been happening behind my back?" My voice was steady, but it was a fight to keep the anger from boiling over. I had let it build for far too long, swallowing my discomfort, my suspicions, in the hope that it was all just a phase. But now, as I looked at her, the mask she had worn so well seemed to slip, revealing something cold, calculating. "What are you talking about, Jason?" she asked, her voice too smooth, too practiced, like she had prepared for this moment. But I could hear the slight tremor underneath, the cracks in the facade. "I don't know what you're accusing me of." I couldn't believe the audacity. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Hannah. The money, the accounts, the lies. You've been hiding things from me, from our marriage. I'm not blind. I see it all now. The withdrawals, the luxury purchases, the trips you've been taking without telling me. You've been playing me for a fool." Her face flushed, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Jason, you're overreacting. It's just money. We've been together for years, and you're making a big deal out of this. Just money?" My voice rose, a mix of disbelief and frustration boiling over. "Do you realize what you've been doing? This isn't just about a few purchases. You've been taking money from our joint account without even telling me. You've been hiding it, covering it up like it's nothing. Do you even care about what this does to us? To me?" Hannah took a step back, her eyes shifting, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossing her face before it disappeared. "Jason, you know how hard things have been for me. I've been under a lot of stress, and I wanted to treat myself. You never notice me anymore. You're always busy with work, with your projects. I deserve something for myself. Just a little something to make me feel better." My chest tightened. Her words didn't hit me like they should have. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. It was the same story I had heard 1,000 times from her, excuses to justify actions that had been eating away at the core of our relationship. "So, you thought it would be okay to take our money? You thought it would be okay to lie to me? To manipulate me into thinking everything was fine while you were living a completely different life. I worked hard for everything we have, and this, I gestured around the apartment we had built together. This is what you do? She looked away, her face now red with the sting of my words. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing any remorse, she straightened her shoulders and crossed her arms over her chest, like she was ready for battle. You're acting like I've done something unforgivable. I didn't want to hurt you, Jason. I just wanted a little freedom. A little space. Don't you get it? We're stuck in this cycle, and it's suffocating me. You don't listen to me anymore. You don't see me. I had to do something to feel alive. I felt a surge of disbelief hit me. Freedom? I repeated, almost laughing bitterly. You call it freedom to drain our bank accounts, to lie about everything. That's your solution? My hands were shaking now, the anger mixing with a growing realization. I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me anymore. The woman I had married, the woman who once made me laugh, who once filled me with love and hope, was now this stranger, someone who couldn't even look me in the eye. Her voice wavered, but she didn't back down. Maybe I needed more than just a husband, Jason. I needed someone who cared. Someone who understood that I'm not just a wife, not just someone to be put on a pedestal for you to show off. You never made me feel special anymore. It's always about your work, your career. What about me? My chest tightened, the air around me growing thick. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about work or my career. This was about her need for control, her need for attention, her constant pursuit of validation. And I had fallen for it. I had believed, like a fool, that if I just worked harder, gave her more of my time, things would get better. But it was never enough. She had been empty, looking for something outside of our marriage to fill her up. And I had been blind to it. Is this really what you want, Hannah? My voice cracked, the words tumbling out with an edge of vulnerability. Is this how you want to end things? Destroy everything we've built, everything I thought we had? I couldn't believe the weight of it all. How had things gotten this far? How had I missed the signs? How had I let it all slip away, piece by piece, like sand through my fingers? Her face softened for just a moment, but before I could process it, she shook her head, turning away from me. You don't understand, Jason. You never did. I thought I could make this work, but it's too late now. We've both changed. You can't fix this. A coldness seeped into my bones as the finality of her words hit me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even close. She was done. And in that moment, I realized that the woman I had loved so fiercely was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who had been planning all along, someone who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. With a heavy heart, I turned away. My mind was racing, thoughts colliding with each other like an avalanche. I had to think clearly. I had to be strategic. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not until I had uncovered the full extent of the lies, the betrayal, the conspiracy that had taken root in my marriage. There was still time to fight, still time to reclaim my life. But the weight of the decision I had to make was almost unbearable. As I walked to the door, I turned to look at her one last time. You've made your choices, Hannah, and now I'm going to make mine. The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with the remnants of a relationship that had died quietly, unnoticed by one, but painfully evident to the other. The pieces were falling into place, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could fight back, and I would. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and it was as if my whole world was slipping through my fingers. As the hours passed after my confrontation with Hannah, the sense of betrayal continued to gnaw at me. The air in our apartment, once filled with shared dreams and late-night talks, now felt suffocating. Every corner of the room, every piece of furniture, seemed to remind me of the lies I had ignored for so long. I had always thought that marriage meant being a team, sharing everything: joy, pain, even the silent struggles. But now I realized I had been living a lie, caught in a narrative that Hannah and her mother had been scripting behind my back, one I had never even known existed. It wasn't just the money anymore. No, that was just the surface of something far deeper. What hurt the most wasn't the stolen funds or the shopping sprees, those were symptoms of a much bigger problem. The real wound was in the way Hannah had turned her back on me, the way she had, in a sense, chosen her mother over me. over our life together. It was all about control. Linda had been running the show, and Hannah had fallen in line, making decisions that were never meant to be hers alone. It was as if I had become an afterthought, a mere character in a story where I no longer had a voice. As I paced the living room, I began to realize the gravity of the situation. The betrayal ran deeper than just money or a strained marriage. It was systematic, orchestrated over time. Linda had always been there, hovering in the background, subtly undermining me, making sure that her daughter's loyalties were always with her, never with me. It wasn't just a matter of bad spending decisions or stolen moments, it was about control, manipulation, and, ultimately, betrayal on a scale I hadn't fully grasped until now. But I was no longer the man who would sit by and take it. The man who had quietly accepted the role of secondary character in his own marriage. The man who had been so desperate to make things work that he ignored the glaring signs, was gone. That Jason had died the moment I discovered the depths of the deceit. And in his place was a man who would not stand idly by while his life crumbled. I had a plan. I had to. I wasn't going to let Hannah and her mother destroy everything I had worked for. The next day, as the weight of the decision to confront Hannah and Linda settled in, I began my investigation in earnest. I went through every account, every statement, every transaction. My heart pounded as I reviewed the evidence, the realization sinking in that I had been right all along. It wasn't just random purchases. It was methodical, planned, and executed with cold precision. I could see the pattern now, how Linda had orchestrated things from behind the scenes, how she had manipulated Hannah into following her lead, how the two of them had systematically drained our finances to fund their lavish lifestyle. My stomach turned as I clicked through the details: high-end shopping sprees, weekend getaways at expensive resorts, all paid for by my hard-earned money. Money I had assumed was being used to build a future with my wife. Instead, it had been siphoned away to feed their insatiable need for validation, for control, for luxury. My mind raced as I pieced everything together. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let it go on for so long? And yet, it didn't matter now. The past was the past. What mattered was that I had everything I needed to fight back. I had the receipts, the bank statements, the proof that would expose the lies once and for all. It was time to put my plan into action. I wasn't going to walk away from this, not without making them understand that there were consequences for their actions. But first, I needed to confront Hannah. It had to be done. I had to make her see what she had done, and maybe, just maybe, I could get through to her before it was too late. I had no illusions about what I was facing. I knew that Hannah, influenced by her mother, wouldn't make it easy. She had already proven that she wasn't interested in my side of things. But I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. This time, I would take control. That evening, after another silent dinner, I decided it was time. I waited until we were alone, the house eerily quiet, save for the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my chest. I turned to face her, my voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. Hannah, we need to talk. About everything. About the money, the lies, everything you and your mother have been hiding from me. She froze. The mask, that familiar calm, slipped for just a moment. Her eyes flickered with something: panic, fear, but it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. Jason, you're not making any sense. I told you, I didn't mean for it to get this far. It's just money. Just money? I repeated, my voice hard. No, it's not just money. This isn't about a few $1,000s spent here and there. This is about a calculated effort to control me. To control everything we've built. Do you even realize what you've done? You've been lying to me, manipulating me, and I've had enough. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. I wasn't going to sit back and let her spin another excuse. I needed to get through to her. Needed her to understand the magnitude of what she had done. I know everything, Hannah. I know about the withdrawals, the luxury items, the trips you've been taking behind my back. And don't even try to deny it. I've seen the receipts. I've seen everything. Her face turned pale, but she didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms, her gaze cold. You've always been so focused on your work, Jason. You never listened to me. You never paid attention to what I needed, to what I wanted. I had to do something. I wasn't just going to sit around and let you control everything. I needed to feel like I mattered. My heart ached. but my anger was sharper than the pain. So, you thought betraying me was the answer? You thought throwing away everything we had for a few designer bags and a weekend getaway would fix everything? You didn't even give me a chance, Hannah. You didn't even care enough to talk to me, to work through this together. You just went behind my back, and for what? So you could feel better about yourself? Hannah's eyes softened for a split second, but then she hardened again. You don't get it, Jason. I've tried, but it's too late now. I'm done pretending. Done pretending? I felt my world tilt, but I stood my ground. You've made your choice, and now it's time for me to make mine. I won't be your fool anymore, Hannah. I won't let you destroy my life without consequences. The silence between us was deafening, heavy with everything that had been said and unsaid. My mind was clear now. There was no turning back. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. But there was more to uncover, more layers to peel back. I had a plan. It was time to execute it. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. Each word I spoke, each move I made, seeming to echo in the empty space between me and Hannah. She stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze unwavering, but I could see the cracks in her armor. Beneath the cool exterior, I could almost see the regret, the fear creeping up, just beneath the surface. But it wasn't enough. No, it wasn't enough to make me feel any less betrayed, any less shattered by the truth that had been so carefully hidden from me. Do you even understand what you've done? My voice was low, controlled, but the edge in it was unmistakable. I was done with excuses, done with the pretenses. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the manipulation, the lies, the slow erosion of everything we had once shared. I had given her the benefit of the doubt for too long, clinging to the idea of our perfect life, our perfect marriage, even when the signs were all there, staring me in the face. But no more. Hannah shifted slightly, her eyes flickering to the floor before quickly meeting mine again. Jason, she started, but her voice cracked, just slightly. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Didn't want to hurt me? That was the excuse? My anger flared, but I swallowed it back, determined to stay calm, to keep control of the situation. You didn't want to hurt me? I took a step forward, the distance between us feeling like miles. How many times have you looked me in the eye, told me everything was fine, while you've been sneaking around, spending money that wasn't yours to spend? How many times, Hannah? Her face flushed, and she looked away, avoiding my gaze for a moment. But I wasn't done. I couldn't let her off so easily. And it wasn't just the money, was it? It was everything. The way you've let your mother control every aspect of our life, every decision we've made. That is what hurts the most. You've let her dictate everything, and now look where we are. You've been playing me for a fool, hiding everything from me, and for what? So you could live your life on your terms? But what about us? What about our marriage? I said it, the words coming out sharp, slicing through the silence between us. Her jaw tightened, and I saw her flinch, but she didn't speak. My heart was racing, but I kept my composure. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. You've been lying to me, Hannah. You've been lying about everything. And I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. I should have known. I should have paid attention. I paced around the room, feeling like I was going to explode from the storm inside me. Hurt. Betrayal. The crushing weight of the truth. But even through it all, one thing was clear, I wasn't going to just let this go. Not when the lies ran this deep. You know what kills me the most? I continued, my voice quieter now, but the pain was still there, raw and real. The worst part is that I actually believed in you. I thought we were building something real. But all along, you were lying to me, letting me believe everything was fine while you kept secrets from me. And that's what hurts the most, Hannah. Not the money, not the stuff, but the fact that you couldn't be honest with me. Finally, she spoke, but her voice barely reached me, almost like she was trying to convince herself. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to make it stop. She paused, looking like she was struggling for the right words. But you don't understand. You don't understand what it's like, living under the pressure. My mother. She pushes me, Jason. She pushes and pushes until I can't breathe anymore. She makes me feel like nothing I do is ever enough. Like I'm never enough. For a moment, my chest tightened at her words. I saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the same vulnerability that had once drawn me to her. But I knew better now. This wasn't just about the pressure from her mother, this was about her choices. The decisions she had made. In the end, she had chosen betrayal instead of coming to me for support. You should have come to me, Hannah. You should have talked to me, I said, my voice steady even though everything inside me was shaking. But you didn't. You chose to go behind my back. You chose to do it on your own. And now you're telling me it's all because of your mother? I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. You had a choice. We both did. But you made yours. And I can't just forget that. Silence stretched out, thick and heavy. She looked like she was going to say something, but no words came. I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to explain. Trying to make me understand. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The trust was gone. The foundation we had built our life on had cracked under the weight of lies and deceit. There was no going back. My mind was racing, processing everything we had been through, everything we had worked for. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just her mother. It was our marriage, our partnership, our future. And now, it all felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece, beyond my reach. I stared at her, waiting for something, anything, but all I saw was someone who had given up. Someone who had chosen her own path, even if it meant destroying everything we had built. For a moment, I felt sorrow wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by clarity. The clarity that I had to take control back. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words spilling out before I had a chance to think about them. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I can't keep living in a marriage that's built on deceit. Her eyes widened, her lips parted like she wanted to protest. But I didn't give her the chance. I had made up my mind. I'm done, Hannah. I'm done being your second choice. I'm done being the man kept in the dark while you and your mother run everything. I'm done. The finality in my voice hung in the air, thick with emotion. The anger. The pain. The sorrow. But there was also something stronger, something that kept me standing tall. A sense of determination. I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. I wasn't going to live in a marriage built on lies. I turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier, but with every step, I also felt the weight lift from my shoulders. This was the start of something new. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. I was going to fight for my life, for my dignity, for my future. And no one, not even the woman I once loved, was going to take that from me. I stood at the door, my hand on the cold doorknob, holding myself together in that moment. The finality of my words hung in the air, and for a split second, I almost wished I could take them back. Almost. But as I looked at her, standing there shocked, confused, I knew deep down this was the only way forward. There was no turning back. Our marriage had been slipping away for months. Today, it finally shattered. I had never imagined it would end like this. The whirlwind romance, the dream of a future together, now it felt like a distant memory. I had believed in her. I had trusted her. I had thought we were building something real. But in the end, all that was left was betrayal. The money, the lies, the manipulation. It was all a cruel joke. And as much as it hurt, as much as it twisted my heart to pieces, I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship where trust had been obliterated. Her voice cut through the silence. Jason, wait. Please. She took a step toward me, her voice shaky. Was it desperation in her eyes? A glimmer of realization? But it was too late. I had already made up my mind. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. She was gone, and in her place was someone who had chosen a different path. A path that no longer included me. I turned to face her, my voice steady, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. Hannah, I don't know who you are anymore. And honestly, I don't think you do, either. I've spent years trying to make this work, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like we're okay when everything's falling apart. You've lied to me. You've lied to us. And I can't forgive that. Her eyes filled with tears, but the anger in my chest was stronger than the pang of sympathy I felt for her. She had made her choices. Now, she had to live with them. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to make things easier for me. For us. But I didn't know how to fix it. I took a step back, the door still in my hand, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Fix it? You've broken it, Hannah. You've broken everything we had. I can't just pretend that doesn't matter. I exhaled sharply, as if the air was thicker than before. My head was spinning, but my resolve had never been clearer. I've tried. I've really tried, but it's too late now. The damage is done. I don't even recognize you anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have lied, wouldn't have let me be manipulated like this. Hannah stood there, silent, her hand reaching out almost as if to stop me. Jason, please don't go, she said, her voice breaking. I am sorry. I never wanted it to end like this. I don't know what happened. I was so lost. For a moment, I stood still, feeling a flicker of something deep within me. Regret? Maybe. Sadness? Definitely. I had wanted to believe that the woman I had loved was still in there somewhere, beneath the surface. But I had seen too much now. The lies, the deceit, the way she had turned to her mother for comfort, rather than to me. There was no going back to that. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and no amount of apologies or empty promises could rebuild it. I wish things had turned out differently, I said softly, my voice almost lost in the weight of it all. I really do. But I'm not going to keep living a lie. I'm not going to let you continue to drag me through this. I deserve better. We both deserve better than this. Hannah's face contorted with a mix of guilt and frustration. She tried to speak again, but the words faltered, caught in her throat. I could see her struggling with it, struggling to make sense of everything, to find some way to pull me back into her world. But it was too late for that. I had already stepped away from it. And as much as I hated it, as much as the thought of walking away from everything we had built stung, I knew it was the only choice I had left. Turning away from her, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I could feel my heart racing, the fight or flight response kicking in as the finality of it all settled around me. I wasn't the man I had been when I first married Hannah. The trust and love I had given her had been taken for granted, and now, I had nothing left to give. It was time to walk away. As I stepped out the door, the weight of the decision hit me like a punch to the gut. I could hear Hannah's voice, calling out to me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Not this time. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to be her backup plan, her safety net, anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything was fine when it was anything but. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside, the city lights flickering around me like a million tiny stars. But there was something different about it now. Something freeing. I had taken the first step toward my own future. No more lies, no more manipulation. It was my life now, and no one was going to take that away from me. Not even the woman I had once loved. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty street, each step further away from the past, further away from the person I had been. And with each step, I felt myself growing stronger. It wasn't over. It wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. Something real. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally breathing again. My footsteps echoed in the empty street as I walked away from the apartment, each step carrying the weight of the finality I had just made. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. It only reminded me that the world I had known was slipping away, leaving me standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but despite the chaos inside, one thing was clear: I had made the right choice. The moment I stepped outside, the real world seemed to come crashing down on me. I had spent so long holding on to the hope that things could work, that things could get better, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The truth had been staring me in the face all along, and now that it was out in the open, there was no going back. I had spent too much time being controlled by someone else's narrative, too much time trying to please someone who would never be pleased. It was time to take control of my own story. But as I walked, a voice in the back of my mind kept calling out to me, asking me if I was sure that this was really the end, sure that there was no fixing it, sure that I couldn't find some way to salvage what had been lost. I didn't have an answer, not yet. I had told myself time and time again that I couldn't go back, that Hannah had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. But even now, as the adrenaline of my decision began to fade, doubts began to creep in. I tried to shake them off. I couldn't afford to let myself doubt. Not after everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the feeling of being suffocated under the weight of someone else's expectations. And then there was Linda, the constant interference, the control, the manipulation. I couldn't keep letting them dictate my life, my choices. It had been too much. I had been too much of a spectator in my own life. I stopped in my tracks, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. My mind wandered back to the apartment, to Hannah, to the last words we had shared. I had expected anger, but what had surprised me was the desperation in her voice. She had tried to make me feel guilty, tried to make me believe that somehow it was my fault, that my work, my ambitions, my focus on our future was the reason she had turned to her mother for comfort, for control. I could feel the remnants of that manipulation trying to tug at me even now, pulling me back into the web they had spun around me. But no, I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her or anyone else pull me back into the darkness. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my future with, was gone. And in her place, there was someone who was willing to destroy everything we had built for the sake of her own selfish desires. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but more than that, there was clarity. I had to let go. For my own sanity, for my own future, I had to walk away. I had spent too many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, trying to please people who would never be satisfied. But now, for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The weight of everything, of the lies, of the broken promises, of the manipulation was starting to lift. It wasn't easy. The decision was still fresh, still raw, but it was the right one. As I stood there, alone in the quiet street, I realized that this was my moment to reclaim my life. I wasn't going to let them control my story anymore. I wasn't going to be the passive character in my own life, waiting for the next blow to fall. I was going to take charge. I was going to fight back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. For a moment, I hesitated, but I knew who it was before I even looked. It was Linda. Of course it was. The woman who had spent years pulling strings, orchestrating every move, every decision. She was probably calling to try to fix things, to make sure I didn't do anything rash. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the screen, and for a moment, I considered answering. But then, I thought better of it. I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't owe them anything. Without answering, I put the phone back in my pocket, and began walking again, this time with purpose. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their world of lies. I wasn't going to let Linda's manipulations control me any longer. This was my life, and I was done being anyone's pawn. As the night stretched on, I found myself at a crossroads. I had a choice to make, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was all mine. I could keep running, keep avoiding the confrontation that was sure to come, or I could face it head on. I could fight for my life, for my dignity, for the future I wanted to build, but that would mean fully embracing the pain, fully embracing the anger, and using it to fuel the fire inside me. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't stay in the shadows of a marriage built on lies. I had to face the truth, and in doing so, I would finally take control of my own destiny. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked different. My eyes were sharper, my jaw more defined, my posture straighter. I had always been a man of patience, of silence, but not anymore. I was done waiting. I was done pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to step into the light, take control, and face whatever came next. I took a deep breath, my resolve solidifying with each passing second. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be battles to fight, truths to face, but for the first time, I felt ready. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. This was my fight now, and I would win. With that thought, I stepped out of my apartment, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I was finally free. The sun had barely begun to rise the next morning, when I stood outside the courthouse, my hands clammy as I clenched the folder tightly to my chest. I had never imagined that I would end up here standing on the precipice of a battle that was about to define the rest of my life. My stomach churned as I glanced up at the towering structure before me, the steps leading into the building feeling like miles instead of mere feet. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for, the moment I had been dreading. The time to face the consequences of Hannah and her mother's betrayal had come. And I knew I was stepping into an arena where only one would walk away victorious. The night before, I had spent hours going over every detail, every piece of evidence, everything I had gathered over the past months. Bank statements, receipts, recordings. Each document was meticulously organized, each one a small piece of the puzzle that would expose the truth. But the hardest part wasn't the documents. It was the realization that the woman I had once loved, the woman I thought I could trust, was the very person who had shattered my life. My trust had been a foundation, and now, it was nothing but dust. The thought of facing Hannah in this cold, impersonal setting twisted something deep within me, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let emotion dictate my next steps. I had a goal, and I wouldn't lose sight of it. I knew this would be a battle. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Helen, had briefed me extensively. The moment I had walked into her office with the evidence, I had seen the spark in her eyes. She didn't hesitate, didn't question my resolve. She saw it too, the way I had been wronged, the way I had been played by people I thought cared about me. She was ready to fight. "We've got this," she had told me, her tone confident, unwavering. But now, standing outside the courthouse, I wasn't so sure. What if they somehow twisted the narrative? What if Hannah and her mother had already spun the story in their favor, manipulated things to make me look like the villain? The thought made my heart race, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. I had nothing to hide. I wasn't the one who had betrayed anyone. I wasn't the one who had lied, stolen, and manipulated. I was the one who had been wronged. That was the truth. And no matter how they tried to twist it, the truth would win. I entered the courthouse, the cold, sterile air inside contrasting sharply with the anxiety that churned in my gut. I walked down the long hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My mind was racing again. What if I wasn't prepared for what was coming? What if the judge didn't see it my way? I shook the thoughts away. I had done everything I could. I had prepared for this moment, had strategized, had gathered the evidence, and now, it was time to see it through. As I entered the courtroom, my gaze immediately locked on the opposing side. Hannah and Linda were seated together, their faces tight with a mixture of anger and nervousness. They weren't the same people I had once loved, no. These were strangers, people who had betrayed me, people who had manipulated the situation for their own gain. Linda's usual air of superiority was now gone, replaced by a quiet nervousness that she tried desperately to hide. She wasn't in control anymore, I could see that. My lawyer, Helen, sat beside me, her posture calm, her eyes focused. She didn't need to say a word, her presence alone was enough to reassure me. She knew the case, she knew the evidence, and she was ready to take them down. The proceedings began, and my pulse quickened as the judge entered, the gavel striking with a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the moment that would change everything. The moment when my life would finally be in my own hands. As the opposing lawyer began their argument, I felt my chest tighten. They were painting me as the villain, describing me as distant, unloving, someone who had neglected my wife and driven her into the arms of another. But I wasn't buying it. The lies were thinly veiled, and I knew it. I had been prepared for this. I had expected it. When it was Helen's turn to speak, she stood with a calm confidence that I envied. She began by presenting the facts: my financial support for the household, my contributions to our life together, the way I had provided for Hannah without question. She laid out the bank statements, the receipts, and the recordings with precision. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of their defense. It was clear to me that they were losing ground, and as the opposing lawyer's face tightened with frustration, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I couldn't quite explain. But it wasn't until Helen brought up the prenuptial agreement that the tide truly began to turn. She calmly handed a copy of the prenup to the judge, highlighting the clause about infidelity. The look on Hannah's face as she realized what was happening was priceless. Her eyes widened, her hands shaking as she tried to suppress the panic that was building inside her. It was as if the rug had been pulled out from under her, and I felt a small sense of triumph. This was it. This was the proof that would finally bring everything to light. The room grew tense as Helen continued, outlining how Hannah's actions had not only broken our marriage, but had also violated the terms of our agreement. As stipulated in the prenup, Helen said, her voice firm, if infidelity occurred, The offending party would owe the other $50,000. My client has been nothing but loyal to this marriage, and it is clear that the defendant, she pointed to Hannah, has violated those terms. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I could feel my heart racing, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. No, it was excitement. The truth was finally out. The lies had been exposed, and I had the evidence to back it up. I had been through hell to get here, but I wasn't about to back down now. When it was Hannah's turn to speak, I barely recognized her. The woman who had once laughed with me, who had shared her hopes and dreams with me, was now a shadow of her former self. She tried to plead, tried to say that she was sorry, that she didn't mean for it to happen this way. But the judge wasn't having it. He was no fool. The evidence spoke for itself. Miss S. Wilson, the judge said, his voice cold. It's clear from the evidence presented that you violated the terms of the prenuptial agreement. As per the agreement, you will be required to pay $50,000 to your husband for the breach. The court also finds that the defendant's actions have severely impacted the plaintiff's well-being and trust, and appropriate measures will be taken. I felt a rush of relief flood over me. I had won. This was my victory, not just legally, but emotionally. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the man standing in the shadows, waiting for someone else to dictate my fate. No, I had taken charge, and now, the consequences were theirs to face. As I stood up to leave the courtroom, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. The storm had passed, and now, I was free. I sat quietly in the car, the engine idling softly, but inside, my mind was racing. The courtroom was now behind me, the gavel's final strike still echoing in my ears. The moment I had waited for, feared, and ultimately fought for had arrived. The court's ruling was clear: my actions had been justified, and I had won. Yet, as I drove away from the courthouse, the rush of triumph began to dissipate, replaced by a strange emptiness that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't that I hadn't earned this victory. It was that the journey to get here had come at a price. A price that wasn't just about money or assets, but something much deeper. My faith, my trust, my belief in love and partnership had been shattered. The dream I once held of a future with Hannah, the woman I had married, now felt like an illusion, a memory of something that was never truly mine. I knew this was just the beginning. The ruling, the compensation, it was all necessary. But it wasn't the end of the pain. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. No amount of money could erase the years of manipulation, the months of distrust, the countless sleepless nights spent wondering where everything went wrong. The weight of it all pressed heavily on my chest, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was free, I had fought back, and I had won. But there was still a lingering question in my mind that I couldn't shake. What now? As I drove through the city streets, my thoughts returned to the night before the court proceedings. I had stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, looking at a man who no longer recognized himself. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the same person I had been when I married Hannah. No, the man in the mirror was someone who had been hardened by betrayal, someone who had learned the painful lesson that trust could be a weapon, a tool to control, to destroy. I had once believed in the power of love, of partnership, but now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I could ever trust again, at least not the way I had before. The phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a text message from Mark, my closest friend. I had kept him in the loop throughout the entire process, and I knew Mark was eager to hear how everything had turned out. How'd it go? The text read, simple and to the point. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing a response. It's over. It's done. I won. I hesitated for a moment before hitting send, not knowing exactly how I felt about the victory. Winning the legal battle had been necessary, but it didn't feel like the closure I had imagined. I had hoped for some moment of clarity, some sense of finality, but the truth was, everything still felt unresolved. My relationship with Hannah was forever broken, and no amount of compensation could fix that. The phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. This time, the message was from an unknown number. I raised an eyebrow as I read the text. We need to talk. I froze for a moment. The message was vague, cryptic even. But the number, I recognized it immediately. It was Gloria, Hannah's mother. My heart skipped a beat, my pulse quickening. What did she want now? Was she going to try to undo everything? Was she going to come after me, try to twist the narrative again? The thought made my stomach churn, but I quickly pushed it aside. I wasn't going to be manipulated by her anymore. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I wasn't sure if I should even respond. But after a moment of contemplation, I typed back. What do you want, Gloria? I pressed send and leaned back in my seat, waiting. It didn't take long for her response to come through. I think you know exactly what this is about. Meet me. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't want to meet her. I had no desire to listen to anything she had to say. But a part of me knew this was something I couldn't avoid. Gloria had been a constant presence in my life, a shadow hanging over my relationship with Hannah. She had played her part in this entire mess, and if she thought she could sway me, she was sorely mistaken. But if there was anything left to be gained, anything left to understand, I had to face her. It was the only way to truly close the door on this chapter of my life. I tapped the screen of my phone, typing out a response. Where? The message came through almost immediately. I'll text you the address. Don't make me wait. I didn't respond. I just drove. The address wasn't far from where I was, and the further I drove, the heavier the air seemed to get. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Gloria had always been manipulative, always used her power to control situations, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. But this was different. This was the last piece of the puzzle. After this, I could move forward, once and for all. The building was old, worn down, a stark contrast to the glitzy, shiny buildings that surrounded it. As I pulled into the parking lot, I felt my stomach tighten again. This wasn't just about me and Hannah anymore. This was about standing up for myself, showing Gloria that I wouldn't be manipulated, that I was no longer the same man I had been. I got out of the car and walked up to the building, my mind still racing, my heart still pounding. I didn't know what Gloria was planning, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. She wasn't going to let me off the hook without a fight. As I entered the building, I was greeted by a cold, sterile lobby. No warmth, no comfort, just business. A woman at the front desk nodded at me and pointed to the elevator. Second floor, she said, her voice flat. I nodded and made my way to the elevator, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. When the doors opened, Gloria was waiting for me. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, her gaze cold and calculating. I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let her control this moment. I know why you're here, Gloria said finally, her voice low and steady. You think you've won. You think you've got it all figured out. But you don't. You haven't heard the full story. I raised an eyebrow. I've heard enough. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. I wasn't backing down. You haven't heard the truth, Jason, Gloria said, her voice hardening. You don't know everything. There's still more to this than you realize. For a moment, I was silent, considering her words. But I wasn't about to let her twist things again. I had fought too hard, too long, to let her have the last word. I've heard all I need to hear, I replied. This is over, Gloria. You've lost. Hannah's lost. And now, it's time for me to move on. You can't control me anymore. You never could. Gloria's eyes flickered with something anger, frustration. But she quickly masked it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You think it's over? You think you've won? This isn't the end, Jason. It's just the beginning. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew the truth. I had won, and now, it was time to walk away. With that, I turned and walked out, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my mind. This was it. The end of the chapter, the end of the nightmare. And as I walked into the cool night air, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was over. The battle had been fought, and I had come out on top. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was free. Wow. Just when you thought it couldn't get crazier, it does. The final twist will leave you speechless. Did I really get the revenge I deserved? And how does the truth hit everyone involved? Trust me, you don't want to miss the shocking conclusion. What's your take on this entire saga? Was this the ultimate revenge? Or did I make a huge mistake? Comment below, I want to hear your thoughts. The story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for oneself, even when faced with betrayal and manipulation. In a society where trust is essential, we must recognize that our self-worth isn't determined by others' actions. Whether in personal relationships or professional environments, it's vital to maintain boundaries, communicate openly, and never let anyone control your narrative. Don't let fear or guilt stop you from doing what's right. Remember, your happiness and peace of mind should always come first. Trust yourself, protect your dignity, and never allow anyone to define your future.